We're selling the house, Mom. It's for the best. My son James wouldn't meet my eyes, but his wife Jessica stared at me, her expression a mixture of impatience and pity. "You're a burden, Maggie," she said, her voice sharp. "Frank's gone, and we're done taking care of you." I reeled, my hand gripping the kitchen counter I had polished just that morning. "James," I whispered, looking for my son, the boy I had raised, the man I had loved. He just shrugged, a weak, defeated gesture. "It's done, Mom." They left me at a highway motel with 2 suitcases and less than $1,000 to my name. But 5 years later, when James and Jessica showed up at the iron gates of my mansion in Millbrook Heights, they learned what being done truly meant. It all started just 3 days after my husband Frank's funeral. I was 60 years old and a widow. My world had collapsed into a gray fog of grief and paperwork. James, my only child, and his wife Jessica had been staying with me. Helping, they called it. I was grateful for their presence, leaning on them in a way I never had before. Frank had always handled the finances. He was an engineer, a man of numbers and certainties. I was a gardener. My domain was the earth, the cycles of life, the quiet patience of nurturing things. I had spent 40 years turning our suburban backyard into a paradise. I was the nurturer. Frank was the provider. Now he was gone, and I admitted, lost. "Mom, let's sit down," James said that Tuesday morning. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee I didn't remember making. Jessica sat opposite me, her nails a perfect glossy red. She slid a stack of papers across the table. "We've taken care of everything, Maggie," she said. She never called me Mom. "Taken care of what, dear?" "The house. We've sold it." The words didn't register at first. Sold it? But this is my home. Frank and I paid it off 20 years ago. "Exactly," Jessica said, her smile tight. "It's prime real estate. The market's hot. We got a fantastic all-cash offer." "We? James? What is she talking about?" I turned to my son. He was staring at the salt shaker as if it held the secrets to the universe. "Mom, it's too much for you. The upkeep, the memories. We found a wonderful place for you." He slid a glossy brochure across the table. "Golden Sunset Assisted Living. A nursing home?" My voice was a shredded whisper. "You're putting me in a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home, Mom. It's a community," Jessica corrected me. "You'll have your own room, 3 meals a day. You won't have to worry about anything." "I don't want to go there. This is my home. Your father built that greenhouse for me." Jessica's veneer of patience cracked. "Frank is gone, Maggie, and frankly, this house is worth too much to just sit here while you garden. James is the sole heir. We have plans." "James," I pleaded, "tell me this isn't true." He finally looked at me, his eyes hollow. "It's for the best, Mom." The argument was short and brutal. I had no legal standing. Frank's will, written 30 years ago, left everything to me, but a newer will, one I'd never seen, had apparently been signed 2 years ago, leaving everything to James. "Frank was sick," James mumbled. "He wanted to make sure we were taken care of." I knew Frank hadn't been sick 2 years ago. This was a lie. This was their doing. "You're a burden, Maggie. Jessica finally spat, the truth coming out like venom. "You've been a burden since Frank got sick. We're done. We want our lives back." They packed 2 suitcases for me. They didn't let me choose what to take. They missed my mother's jewelry, but they packed my comfortable shoes. They drove me to the Sleepy Hollow Inn, a faceless motel off I-35 with a flickering neon sign and a smell of stale cigarettes and bleach. James pressed a wad of cash into my hand. $950, Mom. It's what's left after expenses. "Where is the rest of the money from the house?" I asked, my voice numb. "Taxes, fees, debts Frank had," Jessica lied, pulling James by the arm. "We have to go. The new owners are waiting." They drove away in their new SUV, the one they'd bought last month. I stood there, a 60-year-old widow in a motel parking lot with 2 suitcases and $950, watching my entire life disappear down the highway. I sat on the edge of the stiff polyester comforter for hours. The grief for Frank was a physical weight, but something new was mixing with it. A cold, clear anger that burned away the fog. They hadn't just thrown me out. They hadn't just stolen my home and my inheritance. They had tried to bury me. They had looked at me, Maggie Williams, their mother, and decided I was dead weight, a problem to be discarded at a cheap motel. I looked at my hands, rough and stained with 40 years of good soil. Frank had always called them my magic hands. "You can bring anything back to life, Mags," he'd say. I thought of my garden, of the hydrangeas I'd pruned back to bare sticks, only to see them erupt in blue blossoms. I thought of the half-dead rose bush I'd rescued from a neighbor's trash, now a sprawling giant that covered our fence. They thought I was finished. They thought they could just toss me on the trash heap. But they forgot one crucial thing. They forgot I was a gardener. They forgot I knew exactly how to make things grow from nothing. They thought they were burying me, but they didn't realize they had just planted a seed. That night, I didn't cry. I made a plan. The $950 was a lifeline, but a short one. The motel was $60 a night. I had 2 weeks, maybe less. The next morning, I walked to a nearby diner and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, black coffee and 1 piece of toast. With a clear head, I assessed my skills. I was 60. I had a high school diploma, 40 years of gardening experience, and a basic understanding of bookkeeping from helping Frank with his taxes. I found a temp agency and landed a part-time job as a bookkeeper for a local struggling garden center called Mitchell's Nursery. The owner, Sarah, was a young woman in her late 20s, overwhelmed and drowning in debt. The big box stores were killing her. "I can only pay you $14 an hour, Maggie," she said, her eyes apologetic, "and only 20 hours a week." "I'll take it," I said. I moved from the motel to a tiny weekly rate studio apartment. It was grim, but it was mine. I spent my days at the nursery balancing Sarah's books and my evenings staring at the blank walls of my room. Then, one Friday, I saw the dead pile. Behind the main greenhouse, Sarah had a mountain of plants, wilted hydrangeas, dormant orchids, browned ferns, and scorched maples, all deemed unsellable. "What do you do with those?" I asked Sarah, who was marking down inventory. "Toss 'em," she sighed. "Goes to the landfill. The disposal fees are killing me. It's a total loss. I walked over to the pile. I saw what she saw, waste. But I also saw what she didn't, potential. I picked up a withered orchid. The leaves were limp, but the roots I could see were still pale green. It wasn't dead. It was just dormant. "Sarah," I said, an idea sparking, "let me have them." "Have them? Maggie, they're dead." "No, they're not," I said. "They're just sleeping. Let me take them to my apartment. If I can revive them, I'll bring them back. We can sell them." "Sell them? Who's going to buy a dead plant?" "Let me try. What have you got to lose?" For the next 2 months, my tiny studio became an intensive care unit for plants. I set up a small, makeshift greenhouse on my tiny balcony. I used my gardening knowledge, repotting, careful pruning, feeding, light management. I talked to them, just like Frank used to tease me for doing. And they came back. The orchids rebloomed. The ferns unfurled new, bright green fronds. The hydrangeas budded. I brought the first batch back to Sarah's nursery. She stared at them in disbelief. "Maggie, how?" "They just needed someone to listen," I said. We created a small hand-painted sign, "The Phoenix Corner, Rescued and Revived Plants." We sold them for 50% off the original price. They were gone in a single weekend. People loved the story. They loved the value. They loved the idea of giving something a second chance. My bookkeeping job was quickly forgotten. The Phoenix Corner became my full-time passion. Sarah and I struck a deal. I would manage the recovery program, and we'd split the profits from the revived plants 50-50. Within 6 months, Sarah's nursery was out of the red for the first time in 3 years. Our Phoenix Corner was a local sensation. But I was still just one 60-year-old woman working out of a tiny apartment. "You need to scale," Sarah said. "Other nurseries are hearing about this. They want a Phoenix Corner too." I was overwhelmed. I didn't know how to run a business. I just knew how to save plants. "Go to the Small Business Development Center," Sarah urged. "Ask for Eleanor Rodriguez." Eleanor was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, a retired VP from Dell who now volunteered her time. She listened to my story, looked at my simple spreadsheets, and nodded. "Maggie, you're not selling plants," she said, her words echoing in my head. "You're selling a method. You're selling a replicable, high-profit, low-waste system. You don't need to save every plant yourself. You need to teach others how to do it." Over the next year, Eleanor became my mentor. We trademarked the name Phoenix Plant Recovery. We created a franchise model. It wasn't a product, it was a service. We would go into struggling nurseries, train their staff in my rehabilitation techniques, set up their Phoenix Corner, provide the branding, and take a 15% royalty on all Phoenix sales. It exploded. The industry was desperate for a way to stop the bleeding of deadstock losses. Within 2 years, we were in 30 nurseries across Texas. Within 3 years, we were in 12 states. I wasn't Maggie the widow anymore. I was M.L. Williams, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar franchise. I moved from my tiny studio into a beautiful condo downtown. I hired staff. I gave Sarah Mitchell 20% of the national company, making her a millionaire. But James and Jessica? I hadn't heard from them in 5 years. I'd sent emails. They went unanswered. I tried calling. The numbers were disconnected. They had disappeared with my money, and I had rebuilt my life without them. 5 years after being left at the Sleepy Hollow Inn, I was 72. Phoenix Plant Recovery was valued at $30 million. I had money, I had respect, and I had a purpose. But there was one last thing I needed to do. Millbrook Heights was the most exclusive, old money neighborhood in our county. It was the neighborhood Jessica had been obsessed with. She had a picture of the Harrison estate on her vision board, a sprawling 12,000 square foot mansion on a hill, the most expensive property in the city. It went on the market in March. I bought it, all cash. I spent 6 months restoring the gardens. My first official event was a charity gala for the Small Business Development Center, honoring Eleanor Rodriguez and other women in business. The house was filled with flowers, all Phoenix plants, rescued and revived, and the most influential people in the state. I was on the terrace overlooking the city lights when my security guard approached me. "Ma'am, there's a family at the front gate. A James and Jessica Williams. They say they're your family." My heart stopped. I hadn't seen them. I didn't know what they looked like. I'd heard whispers they'd left Texas, that James was working some low-level sales job in Arizona. "They're not on the list," I said, my voice steady. "They're insistent, ma'am. They have 2 children with them. My grandchildren, Sophie and Leo. I hadn't seen them since they were toddlers." "I'll handle this," I said. I walked down the long, winding gravel path. The iron gates were 12 feet tall. And there they stood. They looked defeated. James was 40, but looked 50. His suit was cheap and ill-fitting. Jessica, once so polished, looked thin and worn. Her hair was brittle, her hands unmanicured. The new SUV was gone, replaced by a 15-year-old minivan, dented and rusting at the wheel wells. In the back, 2 children, around 8 and 10, watched me with wide, confused eyes. "Mom?" James said, his hand gripping the cold iron bars. "Mom, is that you?" "Hello, James." My voice was calm, devoid of the emotion churning in my chest. "Maggie, my God!" Jessica burst into tears, real, ugly sobs. "We saw the article about you, the business, this house. We made a mistake, Maggie, a terrible mistake. We lost everything," James cut in, his voice desperate. "The money went fast, bad investments, Jessica's job. Please, Mom, we've been living in a motel. We have nowhere to go. Please, we're family." "Family," I repeated the word. It tasted like ash. "You left me at a highway motel, James. You stole my home. You stole my husband's memory, and you left me with $950. We were stupid," Jessica wailed. "We were grieving. We didn't know what we were doing." "Please, Maggie. The kids, they haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days." I looked past them, at the 2 small faces in the back of the minivan. My grandchildren. They were innocent in this. I pressed the intercom. "Greg, let the children in. Just the children." The pedestrian gate buzzed open. "What? No, Mom, please." James rattled the gate. "We're their parents. You can't just take our kids." "You can't?" I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a cold whisper. You took my home. You took my life. You left me to rot. You're lucky I'm not calling the police for fraud. I looked at the children. Sophie? Leo? I'm your grandmother, Maggie. You're going to come inside with me. My housekeeper, Maria, is making chicken and dumplings. The kids looked at their parents, then at me, and slowly climbed out of the van. They were thin and pale. They walked through the gate, and I put my arms around them. "Mom, please," James begged. I turned back to them, to my son and his wife, two people I no longer knew, two people who had tried to destroy me. "You are not welcome on this property," I said, my voice final. "The children will stay here. They will be fed, clothed, and sent to a good school. You two, you're on your own." "But where will we go?" Jessica cried. I looked at her, at the woman who had called me a burden, who had stolen my future. "I believe the Sleepy Hollow Inn still has vacancies," I said. "I'm sure you can find $950 somewhere. You're adults. Figure it out." I turned my back on them. I took my grandchildren by the hand and walked up the long path to my mansion, the one I had earned, the one I had built. I didn't look back at the sound of their wailing at my gate. That night, I sat in my garden, the one I had built from scratch, surrounded by hundreds of phoenix plants. Sophie and Leo were asleep upstairs, safe in clean beds. My company was thriving, and my heart, which I thought had broken 5 years ago, felt strangely whole. They had tried to bury me, but they didn't know I was a seed. And from the dirt of their betrayal, I had grown an empire.